Electrostatic discharge can be a significant problem for people working with technology. This is the discharge of static electricity. Static electricity is electricity that is static. It doesn't go anywhere. And as long as it's not going anywhere, it's not harmful to any of our components. It's when this electricity is discharged that problems can occur. This discharge or movement of static electricity from one device to another can damage computer components. This is an electron microscope scan of electrostatic discharge at 4,300 power, and you can see it leaves a nice hole in this particular component. If you've ever touched a doorknob and felt the static electricity discharge, you're feeling somewhere around 3,500 volts of static electricity. But it doesn't take anywhere near that amount of voltage to damage these components that we work with. Only 100 volts or less can damage the components inside of our computers. Fortunately, there are steps we can follow that will minimize or control electrostatic discharge. One of these is to work in an environment that is over 60% humidity. You'll find it's difficult for static to be able to discharge at these high humidity levels. Of course, when you're working in an air-conditioned office, it's going to be very difficult to get humidity values up to 60%, and even if you could, it would be a very uncomfortable place to work. If you don't have anything available to help control ESD, then one of the things that you can do is use yourself to self-ground. If you're working inside of a computer, you would touch the metal case itself along the outside of the computer before touching any of the components on the inside. This will equalize the electrostatic potential between you and the device you're working on, and when you touch inside of the computer, there won't be any electrostatic discharge. You will find some sources that will tell you that you need to keep the computer plugged into a power source whenever you want to control electrostatic discharge, or that you somehow need to connect yourself to an electrical ground to prevent electrostatic discharge. Both of these are completely false. You should always unplug from a power source when working inside of a computer, and you should never connect yourself to an electrical ground. Even though you're touching the case to minimize the amount of electrostatic discharge, it's always a good best practice to only touch the outside edges of the cards or components you're working with. That way, if there is some electrostatic discharge, it won't be able to touch any of the components on the card. You'll only be affecting the outside edges of the card. As a best practice, you should have an anti-static strap that you could strap to your wrist and then connect the metal part of that strap to the case that you happen to be working on. Instead of touching the metal case every time you wanted to touch a component on the inside of that computer, you instead have this strap that effectively does that for you. You might also want to put your computer or the device you're working on an anti-static pad, and then you can connect your strap to that anti-static pad as well. That will equalize the electrical potential between you and the device that you're working on. If this is a larger work area, you may want to have an anti-static mat, so no matter where you're walking, you will always be connected to the devices that you're working on. And eventually, you'll want to move components from one place to the other. So to help protect those components from electrostatic discharge, you may want to make sure that you put them inside of an anti-static bag. Here's an example of somebody working on a laptop. They have an anti-static strap around their wrist, and the strap is connected to the anti-static pad that all of these components are sitting on. This means you can lay all your components out on this anti-static pad, connect yourself to the pad, and not have to worry about electrostatic discharge. And here's the anti-static bag you would use to put devices in to protect them from electrostatic discharge. These bags don't often have any type of other protection, so if you're shipping this component, make sure you wrap this in bubble wrap or some other type of protection for shipping. As an IT professional, you may be responsible for disposing of computer equipment, but it may be difficult to keep track of exactly how and where you should dispose of it. Fortunately, there's documentation available in the Material Safety Data Sheets, or MSDS. These safety sheets are provided with every component, and if you don't have the original safety sheets, you can usually download them from the manufacturer's website. In the United States, these safety data sheets are mandated by the United States Department of Labor, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA. You can find out more on their website at www.osha.gov. The MSDS will tell you everything you need to know about the component. So if you're trying to dispose of batteries, display devices, solvents, toner, or anything else, you'll find the instructions are in the MSDS. You might also hear the Material Safety Data Sheet abbreviated as an SDS, and the name of this sheet may change depending on what country you're in. Here's some of the detailed information you'll get from an MSDS. You'll get the product name and the company that manufactured the product. You'll understand the composition and the ingredients inside of the product. You'll get a breakdown of the hazard information, so you know how this will affect a human if it happens to come in contact with this device. You'll have first aid measures, firefighting measures, information about accidental release or leaking that may occur with this device, how you would handle it, how you would store it, and there's many more details contained on the MSDS. The electronic devices we use in technology expect to run at a particular temperature level, and the manufacturer's documentation will tell you what those particular ranges are. It should also give you information on an expected humidity level for this device. High humidity means you're going to have condensation on these devices, which of course is very bad for an electronic device. And low humidity level means there's going to be static discharges. Ideally, you need a number that's in between those two, and although 50% tends to be a good number for humidity, it can be difficult to maintain that in a cooled environment. Our servers, routers, switches, and other components are constantly creating heat, and it's important that we're able to cool those. For that reason, you don't want to put all of this equipment into a closet that's not ventilated. You want to be sure there's some way to get the hot air out of that area and get cool air in to keep those systems at the proper temperature. We can't control the power that's coming into our systems, but we can control what we can do if we happen to lose that power source. You want to have an uninterruptible power supply, or a UPS, that will provide you with backup power if you lose the primary power source. The UPS is also very good for protecting against brownouts, where you have a lowering of the voltage available, or power surges where there is a spike of voltage. Depending on the needs and budget, you may have one of three different kinds of UPS. One of the most inexpensive is the standby UPS, which will switch over to battery if it loses the primary power source. You might also want to get one that provides a stepping up of power if you happen to start losing power in a brownout situation. Those would be a line interactive UPS. And an online UPS tends to be the more expensive of these three, where you're always connected to the battery side and there's no switching process if you happen to lose main power. Besides the environmental control, you also have other features available on a UPS. For example, the UPS could tell your computer that there's no longer any main power and it should go through its normal shutdown process. You also have options for other types of battery capacities and outlets on the back of the UPS. And you might also have the option to plug in a phone line or a network connection to suppress any voltages going over those connections. Ideally, we would like to have a single voltage of power coming into our facility with no spikes coming through. But occasionally there can be external sources such as storms or power grid changes that can cause a spike of power to come through our main power connection. To be able to minimize these spikes, we can use a surge suppressor. It will take the spike of voltage coming through and put any excess power onto the electrical ground. These suppressors are also good at removing noise from the electrical line, and they're measured in decibels. The higher the decibel, the better the filtering. The amount of surge that can be absorbed by a surge protector is measured in joules. The larger number the joules, the larger amount of surge suppression. If you want to get a good surge suppressor, you're usually looking for one that has over 600 joules of protection. You also want to get a surge suppressor that can handle the amount of amperage that's being put through that particular unit, and the higher number is going to be the better unit. There's also a set of categories from Underwriters Laboratories. UL 1449 will categorize voltage let through ratings, which show how much of the voltage gets through the suppressor. And the different categories are around 500, 400, and 330 volts, where the lower amount of voltage is the better surge suppressor. If you have computing equipment that's on a manufacturing floor, you may need to protect it from smoke, particles, and other things that may be in the air from that manufacturing facility. In those cases, you may want to get an enclosure that will protect that component from any of those airborne particles. You also want to protect yourself from those airborne particles, so you may want to use an air filter or a mask. This can be especially useful if you're working inside a laser printer where there may be toner and all of that toner dust gets into the air. This mask will prevent you from inhaling any of those toner particles. If you're cleaning the outside of a printer or some other computer, you want to use some type of cleaner that has a neutral detergent. You don't want to use anything that may have ammonia inside of it, for example. And although isopropyl alcohol is very good at cleaning connectors, you don't want to use it on the outside of your computer cases. The process of vacuuming up toner or dust can create electrostatic discharge. So you want to be sure to use a vacuum that's been specially designed for a computing environment and minimizes the amount of static electricity. And you may run into a situation where you need to blow dust out of a computer, and instead of using compressed air in a can, you may want to use the more environmentally friendly compressed air pump. Your local, state, and federal government will also have requirements as to what you must do to be able to protect the environment when working with these high-tech components. You're going to have hazardous waste from batteries, toner, other computer components, and you need to be sure that you dispose of them properly. There may also be requirements for how you dispose of paper, so make sure you check your local requirements and you know that you're disposing of all of these components safely. An important set of policies in your organization revolves around what you do when there is a security incident. If you're the first responder, then you're probably the one who identified the incident. You probably have log information, you may have seen the incident with your own eyes, or you may have gathered information based on monitoring data. The first thing you should do would be to report this incident to the proper channels, and most organizations will have a set of policies and procedures on what to do each step along the way. If you're there first, then this is a great opportunity to begin gathering detailed documentation. You can document what you found in your logs or your monitoring data, and then document anything else associated with the incident. The documentation you create will be used by many people in this investigation, so you want to be sure that it is available to everyone. You want to gather as much information as possible, either through written notes or by taking pictures, especially pictures of a screen, so you can capture exactly what was seen during this incident. Many people will be contributing to this documentation, so you want to be sure that it's in a place where many people can collaborate and add additional details to the documentation. Many organizations will have a collaboration tool or a wiki, so they can always add more details to the documentation that they've created. An important part of collecting evidence in one of these security incidents is to make sure that nothing changes with that evidence. You don't want anybody to be able to tamper any of the details or change anything relating to the evidence. One good best practice is to always hash the information that you find so that if somebody does change something in a file, you'll be able to recognize it immediately. It's very common to capture information, put it onto a read-only type of media, and to use digital signatures to make sure that you know nothing has been tampered with any of that data. There's many different types of software licensing we use in our organizations. One of the most common is called closed source. This is the type of licensing you get from commercial products. Closed source means that you don't have access to any of the source code used to create that application. The developer gives you an executable, and that's what you run on your system. With free and open source software, which is FOSS, the source code is publicly available. You can read through it and see everything relating to the code. Whenever you want to use that code, you can compile it yourself and create your own executable based on that source code. The specifics on how that software can be used is documented in the End User License Agreement, or the EULA. And sometimes organizations will use DRM, or Digital Rights Management, which uses technology to ensure that you're following the terms of the End User License Agreement. If you're buying software for yourself or home use, you're often purchasing a personal license. This is usually a single license associated with a single device, and usually it's a single user who's taking advantage of that license. Usually you would purchase this type of license one time, and there are no additional ongoing costs. This is called a perpetual license. In an enterprise or business, there are often many other options available for software licensing. Two common licensing schemes are a per-seat license, where you're paying a certain amount of money for everyone in your organization, or it may be a site license, which is a single flat fee for your entire site. This normally allows the software to be installed everywhere it's needed, but there are commonly ongoing annual maintenance costs associated with enterprise licensing. PII is personally identifiable information. This is any information that could potentially identify you as an individual. The policies for handling PII are usually documented in a company's privacy policy. So much of our personal information is available on the internet that we often forget how important it is to maintain some level of privacy. And many organizations will use this data and almost forget how important that privacy happens to be. There have been significant breaches of PII. One of the larger ones was in July 2015 with the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, where they compromised PII for many of the people with records in the Personnel Management Office. The information that was compromised included the name, social security number, date of birth, job assignments, and more information for clients of the Personnel Management Office. In total, there were over 21.5 million people whose personal information was compromised. Another important privacy and security standard is the Pci Dss. This stands for the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. This is a standard for protecting credit card information and the transactions associated with those credit cards. This is a comprehensive standard, and it includes how to build and maintain a secure network and systems, how to protect cardholder data, how to maintain a vulnerability management program, how to implement strong access control measures, regularly monitoring and testing the network, and how to maintain an information security policy. A relatively new privacy policy is the Gdpr. This is the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's a policy that was created in the European Union. This allows people to protect their name, their address, their bank details, and really anything associated with private information that may be stored on a website. Under the terms of the GDPR, the end user decides how their data is used on that particular website, and an individual can take control of their personal data and request to have all of their information deleted. A company's compliance with GDPR has to be documented in their site privacy policy so that everyone knows the rights and permissions associated with the end user and how they can protect their personal data. Another important consideration for data privacy is associated with PHI, or Protected Health Information. These are the personal health care records of an individual, which includes your health status, any payments you've made for health care, and anything else related to your medical history. The standards associated with PHI have to be followed across all healthcare providers, so you know that your information will remain safe no matter where it happens to go. The regulations and standards associated with PHI are documented in the HIPAA regulations. This is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. Organizations of all sizes need to have a set of standard guidelines that can help them understand how technology is to be used in that organization. These are your information technology policies, and if you're trying to make decisions about what to do with IT in the future, you need to have a set of very strong policies that you can rely on. These policies are a bit different than information technology best practices. Best practices would be a set of standards which are commonly used in the industry regardless of what your policies might be. For example, if you're connected to the network, you need a firewall. If you have a wireless network, that data should be encrypted with WPA2. And if people have authentication, then they should be using strong passwords. It's not necessary to create standards which include this information, since these would be considered best practices.
Come on, let's go!
Many people believe that someone who works in IT is someone who works very well with computers or other types of electronic equipment. But in reality, someone who works in IT has to be a very good communicator with other people that are either in IT or who are outside of information technology. Being able to communicate with others is a difficult skill to master. It takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. But as you become more skilled in communication, you'll find there are many more jobs available and many more options for your career. Our industry is very good at creating TLAs, three-letter acronyms, or four-letter acronyms or more. We talk in abbreviation constantly, and we use this as a shortcut when we assume that everyone else knows what this acronym stands for. But of course, not everybody understands these acronyms and slang words that we use in the industry. When you're communicating with others, you sometimes have to be the translator that takes these shortcuts and acronyms and turns it into a language that other people can understand. This is sometimes the hardest part of communication, is making sure that everyone knows exactly what everyone else is talking about. You'll very often be communicating with decision makers at higher levels who do not have the same technical knowledge you do, and their job is to make decisions based on the information you're providing. That's why it's important that this conversation be very clear to everyone so that people can make informed decisions. Fortunately, these types of issues with slang and abbreviations can be easily avoided, especially when you're communicating with people in person or even in an email message. It's very simple to write out exactly what you mean rather than abbreviating or using a shortcut in that communication. One of the challenges we have when listening to someone explain what their problem is that you can often determine what the issue is very early on in the conversation. And from a human nature perspective, we want to jump in and interrupt the person and tell them what the answer is so that we can continue with our conversation. This type of interrupting can be very abrupt, especially when someone is trying to explain all of the problems they happen to have with this particular situation. We want to tell someone that we know what their problem is and that we can fix it very quickly, and there's no need to continue with the explanation. But interrupting someone can have the opposite effect, where they may consider you rude or that you really don't want to help them. Instead, let someone explain the entire situation that they're having, take plenty of notes of what they're asking for, and use it as an opportunity to build a relationship with the customer. Ask questions about what they're seeing. Drill down into the details of what their problem is. You may find that what your first thought was with the issue may actually be something very different. So interrupting would have actually worked in your detriment. This can be especially useful on the phone when there's no way to look at somebody to understand what they might be thinking. And if you're someone who likes to get the problem done quickly, this can be a difficult thing to unlearn. You want to be very patient and have some thoughts about when you want to jump into a conversation and avoid any type of interruption. When someone's explaining the problem they have, it's always useful if you get more details about what they're seeing. If somebody tells you that their browser isn't working, it's an opportunity to drill down on exactly what they're seeing. Was there an error message? Did things slow down? What happened with the browser after you tried to use it? Those types of clarifying questions can help you understand more about the problem and help the customer understand that you're interested in solving the problem. Your objective is to gather more information about what the problem is, not to try to create conflict based on what the customer is seeing. This should be an opportunity for the customer to tell you everything that they know about the problem, not a chance for you to grill the person over what they happen to be doing on their computer. Now that the customer has explained the problem, this is your opportunity to see if you heard exactly what they were saying. It's useful to say, let me see if I understand this correctly. Here's the issue as you saw it, here's the information that you know about it, and here's what happened afterwards. Did I get that information right? The customer can then tell you that the information you have is absolutely correct, or your process of explaining it back to them may have jogged their memory about other details. It's also useful to keep an open mind. Problems that seem very simple from the onset are actually issues that could be very, very complex after you drill down into the details. The worst thing you can do is to assume what the problem is, not clarify any of this information from the customer, and then find out later that your assumptions were absolutely wrong. Most of the time, customers aren't concerned about the details about how you're fixing a problem. They're more interested in understanding what the process is and what they can expect for the resolution. That means it's useful to set expectations with the customer about what their options might be. Be able to provide them with a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, and have them make the decision on what they'd like to do. This may be a situation where a printer isn't working, and your options are to repair the printer at a certain cost or to replace the printer at a different cost. And now the customer can make the decision on what path is going to be the appropriate one for them. It's also useful to document as much as you can so that everyone understands exactly what the next steps might be. This can be especially useful when you're in a large meeting. There are a lot of people. You went through a lot of different scenarios, and now you need to make sure that everyone in the room understands exactly what the next steps are. Contrary to popular opinion, no news is not good news. You want to be sure that everyone is getting a constant status update, even if the status update says that nothing has changed since the last status update. That way they know that you're still checking in on the problem. You still know that you're waiting on certain equipment to arrive. They know that you have been working on this issue, and everybody understands what the timeframes are and what the next steps might be. After a problem has been solved, it's always useful to circle back afterwards and make sure that everything is still working as expected. This is an opportunity for the customer to tell you that everything is working fine, or they may mention that there is another additional issue associated with this, and we need to continue with our troubleshooting efforts. It's remarkable how much you can accomplish by maintaining a positive attitude. Having a positive tone of voice lets your customer know that you're confident that you'll be able to examine all of the issues and come to a resolution for their problem. You may run into situations where a problem simply can't be fixed. If you have a hard drive failure and there is no backup, then all of that data is now gone. The only thing you have is a positive attitude and some ideas and options that you can offer for helping the customer find some of the data they may have lost. No one wants to work with someone who is grumpy or has a bad attitude, and eventually this problem will be resolved, or you'll be at the end of the troubleshooting process, and the only thing left is the customer to look back and think about the entire experience and how well it went with your positive attitude. When you're working through these problems, you want to treat everyone with the proper level of respect. If there's a particular title that's appropriate to use, you want to be sure to use those. And you don't want to be judgmental about the problem or the person who's having the issue. You're the person who should be helping them and teaching them about how to resolve this issue, and you're with them as a partner at every step along the way. The last thing you want to do is create a negative environment by insulting the way somebody is working, acting, or the way that they look. There's an opportunity with every single one of these troubleshooting tasks that you can help make someone smarter. People who aren't involved in technology every day sometimes feel helpless, that they have no idea how to resolve these issues. By spending a little bit of extra time with someone, they'll be more knowledgeable of the entire process and the technologies behind it. And if this problem happens again, they'll be much more knowledgeable on how to resolve it then. Another reason you don't want to be judgmental is because you're also in a position where you can make mistakes. And you will make mistakes in your career. Some of them will be very minor, and some of them will be very major. You can use these mistakes in a positive way. You can look back on the problem, understand exactly why this problem occurred, and then make sure that it doesn't occur in the future. When you're working with a customer on a problem, they're the most important person at that time. You don't want to take any phone calls or talk with your coworkers, and you certainly don't want to be texting on your phone. If there is an interruption of some kind that can't be avoided, then you can address that particular interruption, but make sure you apologize to the customer that that particular interruption occurred. Too often, I find that people are trying to avoid conversations with their customers. I like the environment to be open and inviting. I like to put a candy bowl right on my desk and have a reason that someone would stop by just to say hi or to explain a problem they might be having. You want to keep that conversation open and going in both directions all the time. If most of your job happens over the phone, there's still things you can do to make those phone calls open and inviting. You want to be sure there's no background noise when you're on the phone, and you want to be sure you're using a headset that you're getting very high quality audio from. And if you're the only one on the phone, don't use the speakerphone. It creates distance between you and your customer. Instead, use your handset, which is not only better audio, but it makes the customer know that you're listening to everything they're saying. Someone struggling with a technical problem can create a very emotional environment. Whenever these stressful situations occur, you want to be sure that you're the one to help minimize the amount of stress. You don't want to argue or contradict what someone's saying. You instead would like to listen to what someone's saying and ask more questions about the problem they're having. You want to engage with the customer and let them know that you're willing to work with them to solve this particular problem. They may just need an opportunity to vent. And once they've gotten the venting out of their system,